I'm on too. Okay, welcome everyone, those out in the audience. That's the Financial Advisory Board regular workshop. I'm on too. Okay, welcome everyone, those out in the audience. That's the Financial Advisory Board regular workshop. I'm on too. Okay, welcome everyone, those out in the audience. That's the Financial Advisory Board. It wasn't that good. This meeting has been pre-recorded. Okay. Welcome everyone, those out in the audience. That's the Financial Advisory Board. It wasn't that good. And it keeps recording. This meeting has been pre-recorded. Okay. Welcome everyone, those out in the audience. That's the Financial Advisory Board. It wasn't that good. The audience. That's the Financial Advisory. Okay, is that any better? Maybe. Can you hear me out there?
Can you hear me? Is that Ed Kornfeld? Can you hear me?
This is the heart. Please call the roll.
Member Packler is absent. Member Cornfield
Here?
here is here via Zoom. Member Goldberg,
Present.
Member Greenwald,
Present.
Vice Chairperson Riami,
Present.
and it looks like we have one other person, Member Weiner, who is also absent.
All right, please rise for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic.
We just stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and
Thank you. Since this is an advisory board meeting and we don't have a quorum, so we're not going to approve agendas or minutes or anything else. We have to be, all that will have to be moved to the next meeting. Are there any public comments? No. None, so we will move on to let's see, I guess we're going to do the first quarter financial report. David?
Thank you. What I've included in your package here is not only the first quarter, but I also wanted to give you how we ended the year for 2022 and how you, so the very first 2 pages of my presentation there is for FY22. And so you can see that again, going from the top down, line number 6, total tax revenues, we came in about 2% higher than what we had anticipated. Miscellaneous revenues, again, about 2% higher. Other revenues, and that's why I highlighted, other revenues were lower, but the reason why they were lower, you can see that on line number 16. We didn't have to pull any reserves out. So that's what really brought that one down. We were anticipating to having to pull reserves in, but we didn't need to do that. And the other revenues here, other funds, including the building, the water, and the sewer fund, they were, obviously you can see there on line number 20, the building fund, obviously last year into this year continues to do well. These numbers here on line number 20 do not include Gulfstream activity, since that kind of happened at the beginning of this year. And you can also see the water and the sewer, you know, as far as revenue compared to budget, it was down. But if you'll recall, you know, we did increase those rates accordingly. And so that's what I put there on line number 24. Line number 24, that's, you know, you can see where if the revenues were down, but the main contributing factor of that was the fact that we didn't have to pull reserves in. So that's why they were down. And so without that reserves, our revenues would only have been down $5,728. You know, pretty, but for all intents and purposes, you know, on target. So now we go from the revenue side of life, we go down now to the very bottom portion, which shows, you know, the expenditures. And so, you know, we had, as far as shared services, we're a little bit 4% increase on the overall cost there. Again, what shared services are, that's the overhead expenses. So for example, those things that we necessarily can't allocate to a specific department, whether it be property insurance, general type of insurances, those get into that bucket there called shared services. Those were a little bit over. But at the end of the day, our general fund line number 4040, general fund expenditures were under budget by 3%. And then you can tell there the other funds. So what this, once again, what this report shows is how did we do compared to our budget? If we flip the page over, now what you're seeing is each individual fund. Funds are on top: general fund, discretionary sales tax, building, water, sewer. This is now actual revenue, right, compared to actual expenditures below there. And so you can see where, and let me just draw your attention to somewhere. So let's take, for example, water fund. So I'm in that column, water fund. You can see the revenues there on line number 18, $4.38 million. And then you can see expenditures there on the bottom, line number 32, $4.264 million. Line number 33 shows the net. But here's what I want to draw your attention to. See that net of $118,000? Well, that was all of that was derived from the top line 14 in grants. See, that's the ARPA funds. And so you can see line 14, well, we brought in $287,000 of grant funds, ARPA funds, which caused that fund to have a net surplus, right? And so if you can think that, hey, without those funds, it would have been negative, right? So that's where that really came into, and the same with the sewer side of life, right? The sewer side of life.
And how long are those grants valid for? How many more years?
The federal government gave us in total, I think, $1.9 million. They divided it into two, and that's it. That we won't be receiving any more ARPA fund dollars. It was more related to the COVID situation. And so at the end of the day, we didn't budget any of that for FY23. And so that's where we're at. But this right here, remember, I'm looking at last year. You know, I'm showing you in total, how did we do last year? And then below that, lines 35 through 41, there are kind of our internal transfers. You know what I mean? How each fund interacts with each other. So that's and by the way, we sent everything over to our new auditors. So everything's been trial balances, reconciliations, bank statements, confirmations, everything that was sent over to the auditors in December. And we're anticipating that they will start field work right away, probably in February. My goal is to have, what I'm pushing for is my goal is to have, audited financial statements by March, April. Plenty of time for the June deadline. Yes, sir.
On the previous page, lines 43 and 44, the water fund and the sewer fund,
On the previous page. Okay, so you're back at the,
it's page 21 on the handout.
yes, go ahead.
Lines 43 and 44. So
Yep.
two of the biggest variations on the report are the much lower than budgeted expenditures for out
Yes.
of the water and sewer fund.
Yep.
Which are big. I mean, those two
Yep.
things add up to like 1.6 million or close to
Yep.
it. So my question is, why is that? Is that mostly deferred capital projects that were budgeted but then put off rather than operational discrepancies? Is that correct?
That is correct. So
Okay.
typically, yeah, you're right on target
Because
there.
that's a big, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Didn't get spent.
Right, it is. That did not get spent, but what happens typically, your staff develops 5-year budgets, especially on the water and sewer side of life. That's kind of customary in the industry, is to have those 5-year budgets. Those things those projects don't necessarily go away, right? They just shift. And so when we're looking out 5 years, we estimate how much capital. A lot of what happens with the condo associations, right? We estimate how much capital will be used, but right.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood what.
You
those
understand it
discrepancies
perfect,
were from.
right.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
So how are we doing on, you mentioned Gulfstream. How are we doing on Gulfstream?
Gulfstream is great. We can flip through so what we looked at here was our fiscal year ending September 30th, 2022. So now what we'll do is we'll go into page 24, starts our first quarter, right? Starts our first quarter
David,
for
David.
this fiscal year. And you have to understand that, yep, that top line property taxes, right? We get 70 to 80% of our property tax revenue, right, within that first quarter. So it does kind of throw things off a little bit. But we're tracking there. These other items here, as the quarters go on, those gaps will close. And because we will start to get those funds, whether it's franchise fee, user sales or use tax and intergovernmental funds, we'll typically get those on a more reoccurring basis, and you'll see that gap close. But overall, as far as the building department goes, you asked about the building department. So see line number 20. Right now, we're projecting to be about 3 in revenues wise. We're projected to be about 3% right now over our budgeted figures as far as revenues go. And as far as expenditures go, again, what we're comparing actuals for the quarter to the budget. That's what this page does. And you can see most line items there with a few exceptions, again, that shared services, the police department there. We have an annual contract for communication services that we paid in the first quarter. That's why that budget there is a little bit higher. But at the end of the day, the expenditures for the government wide I'm on line number 40. Looks like, right now we're trailing about 5% below our budget. Same thing with the on the water side. Water and sewer, the budget versus actual is really dependent on the capital program, as the doctor had mentioned. And if we flip the page over to page 25, you can see again, actual revenues minus actual expenditures broken out by each of the funds. So you can see that the water fund, for example, is we are sitting there, we're $2,886 above budget. Same thing with the sewer side. We haven't done any major capital outlay. You can see there on line number 26 is our capital outlay. That's where you would see a lot of those capital funds coming from. But right now, I would tell you overall for the first quarter, in summary, for the first quarter, we're as far as revenues go, we're tracking where we anticipated. Expenditures on the general fund, we're down about 5%, which is understandable. On the water and sewer side, our expenditures are below where we thought. But again, we have a lot of the capital improvement projects that will probably be kicking off by the second quarter. So we will really start to see a shift in that when we get to the second quarter of the fiscal year.
Can you hear me? Said Cornfeld?
Oh, one quick
Yes, sir.
question.
Sure.
It's always hard this early in the year to really figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're seeing so far that concerns you about budget and where we are at this point in the
No.
year?
No.
Thank you.
And can anybody hear me? Hello?
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have some questions if you could hear me.
Not on our end, it's on his computer.
Can you make sure that you're unmuted?
Your microphone or your unmuted?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
am
his is on.
unmuted. I am unmuted. It's everything is the way it should be. Jacqueline, can you hear me?
It's technology, not ours.
Can I go ahead and jump in while we wait here?
Yes, go ahead.
So we previously discussed the town values having the post office, and I believe Marshall was committed to finding a new spot for it or keeping it in its current location. Hopefully that's been resolved. Question for you. The budget, 459,000 for the library. Page 24. I realize Marshall's not here, and I noticed the vice mayor's here. Just a question. For towns similar to our size, do they typically have a library that they would spend 460,000 on? You know, we have this library that gets about less than 15 people a day. So I guess my question is this a normal amount of money that a town would spend for our size in a library?
I don't know. I don't have data on what other towns and libraries the cost of that is. So I don't know how to answer that. Other than if you look on page 25, and you look at overall what the town line number 21. Right, so line number 21 shows us what our expenditures are for, for the library would be included there in that line 21. I know that for the town of Highland Beach, the library is essential figure and an essential part. So, but as far as what similar cost libraries have in other communities, I don't have that data.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I think you'll find that, I don't know about the cost, but I think I can assure you that the town considers this an essential amenity.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. It may turn out that, I think probably there are a fair number of towns our size that may not even have a library rather than one as nice as the one that we have. But I think it's a really very valued service in our town. I wouldn't recommend messing around with it. In fact, we usually ask, is there anything else you need every year rather than so. But I think you're probably right. I mean, per capita, we probably invest more than many other places of our size, but I think most people would think it's a good investment.
Oh, the amount of events that they have there is phenomenal. And I think it's just one of those key characteristics that makes Highland Beach so special is the 3 Miles of Paradise is that the library is a gem. absolutely. But
number two in the south, you know?
it's true.
Can I be heard now?
Okay, well, by the way,
Hello?
the
Yeah.
next meeting, since we don't have the quorum, we'll be nominating and electing the chairperson and vice chairperson. Term ending May 2024. Okay,
And just for record, we do have member Cornfeld on Zoom who's having issues with microphone.
yes,
So we have it on.
I'm not, I'm live.
hasn't figured it out. yet.
Jacqueline, I'm off.
You may want to disconnect from the meeting and we can reconnect you and see if that works.
Okay.
Okay. In the meantime, Vice Mayor Natasha Moore.
Good afternoon, Financial Advisory Board. I'm Natasha Moore, Vice Mayor, and I am here to talk to you about water and sewer rates. And I wanted us to start thinking about the next rate increase, which would be October of 2023. So I'm here in January, talking 10 months in advance, but we need to decide, we need to communicate to the residents 2 months prior to the effective
Can you
date
hear
of
me
that
now?
rate increase. So by August, we have to be communicating to the residents. So I wanted the Financial Advisory Board to have the opportunity to review some of the data and try to narrow down what we think that rate increase will be. And then we have a few months to monitor actual revenues for the current billing cycle so that we can make our final decision well in advance of August. So as you know, this is a strategic priority, which is to make the water fund and sewer fund self-funded. So currently there's a transfer that happens from the general fund in order to make ends meet on those two funds.
Can you hear me now?
And so about 3 or 4 years ago, we had embarked on a project to study the funds and the finances of the funds. We hired a consultant to review the expenses and projected expenses to come up with a plan as far as how much we had to raise the rates in order to make the water fund and the sewer fund self-funded. And so Raftelis is the one who did the analysis. They did it in 2020. I guess they started in 2020 and finalized it in 2021 and came up with a whole plan for rate increases. So just to remind you what we've done so far, the first big increase was in April of 2021. And we had an increase of 10.5% on water and then 16.5% on sewer. And that was considered like a mid-year rate increase. So for that fiscal year in 2021, it actually ended up being about a 6.3% increase. Then in October of 21, 6 months later, so I'm on page 28 of your agenda packet. And so then in 2021, we had an 11% increase on water and then a 13% increase on sewer. And then October, the most recent increase in October of 2022, we had a 10% increase in water and then a 12% increase in sewer. So overall, those increases taken together, and when you look at water and sewer, it's been a cumulative increase of about 32%. And so what's happened in the recent past, as you all know, is inflation has been much higher than what we expected. It was much higher than when Raftelis studied the financials. And so what Raftelis had projected the need was for the next 2 years was a 5% increase in 2023 and a 2.5% increase in 2024. And as we looked at how expenses are expected to actually increase because of inflation,
On Zoom for the meeting, for
we're
financial
gonna need
advisory.
much more than
They
that.
cannot
So
hear.
the purpose of today
And-
is to look at projections.
Yeah, the only thing
in
that's
various
here, it
scenarios.
says.
So
Jacqueline
I'm going
has
to
me
show you
muted. How's that
projections
amazing?
using an 8%
So I can't
increase
see
for
the screen.
2023 and then 8% increases each subsequent
Okay,
year
thank
for
you.
4 years. So these, what I'm going to show you are 5-year projections. And I'm going to show you 3 scenarios. An 8% scenario, which means it's an 8% each year for the next 5 years. An alternative of a 10% increase 2023 and then 10% subsequent increases each year. And then I'm going to show you the original 5% and kind of show you why that's too low. And then the rest on page 28 is just basically how is basically our rate structure, how it works out, which we have a base charge and then we have different tiers based on usage. And we also have some properties have an irrigation meter that's just for irrigation, and there's a separate rating structure for that. And then we have a sewer rating structure. And the tiers and the base charge are important in order to balance out, you know, the revenues. We have make sure we have enough revenues to cover our fixed costs. And then the tiers are intended to charge based on usage. So we took a look at the base charge and the tiers to try to balance out covering our fixed costs and usage. So that's kind of the purpose of the rating structure. So if we move to the next page, page 29, the water fund, when you compare the water fund and the sewer fund, the water fund is the bigger fund. So a lot of what we look at on this page will help us understand the sewer fund and the other scenarios. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this page. So the chart on the top, the leftmost chart here, the blue columns represent how much cash the water fund has. So, for example, we have about 3.8 million in cash for fiscal year 2023. That's that blue column. Oh, I guess how do you point?
Yes.
What do you use? How do you, is it that? Oh, I got it. Okay, got it. So these blue columns, so this fiscal 2023, yeah, so right now we're here and we have about, I don't know, maybe that's more like 3.6 million there. So in Raftelis's analysis and what I've seen in other reports as well, is they're saying what we need is what this green line represents, which is 150 days cash. So they were recommending when they were doing all of their projections and how much rate need we needed, they were trying to transition us to getting to making sure we have at least 150 days cash. So as you can see right now, we are more than double. We're like over 300 days cash. So this green line is basically, we don't want to dip below the green line. So we have been, you know, well above the minimum days cash that we need. So this is 2022. And so as we take these rate changes and we go through our budget, you can kind of see we're kind of converging the days cash to getting down to 150 days. And it's important because you want to know what that is because you don't, right now it looks like 2023, we've got a ton. You don't want to like take a drop in rates because you think you're, so much more above the minimum. That's why it's so important to do a 5-year projection because you want to see what those rate changes, how that will, we want to smooth out the rate changes as much as possible. You wouldn't want to take a rate drop and then the next year take a whole huge big rate increase. Our approach is to do it as smoothly as possible. So this projection reflects an 8% increase for 10/1/23 and then the next 4 subsequent years. And so you can see how the level of cash changes and how the days changes. So for fiscal year, so that actually impacts, the next rate change actually impacts fiscal year 2024 because October 23 actually is the beginning of fiscal year 2024. So that's what that would be. And then the next year, let's say we take another 8%, that's what fiscal year 2025 is. And then fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027. Now fiscal year, and the reason why it dips and it comes back up, and that's because of the way we're paying off the money that's the loans that are outstanding on the water fund. So like by the time we get to 2027 and 2028, we've like paid off a lot. So that's why it bounces back up. Just to kind of give you a little bit of feedback. And then the other thing I'll tell you what's in these projections are all the capital expenditures, all our operating expenditures, all the expected expenditures, operating and future investments are all in these charts right here. That's why I think this is a really good summary. So I'm going to pause here and take questions. Yes.
Yeah, this actually looks worse than I was hoping
Okay.
that it would. You're talking about having an 8% raise every year, right?
Correct.
In this
eight-
hypothetical model.
correct.
And with an 8% raise every year, which is going to be, I don't know what it is compounded, but it's over 40%, certainly over the 5 years.
Mhm.
And we're still going to be dropping our reserve capital from 3.6 million down to whatever that is, 1.5 million.
Yeah, it's probably,
So-
2 million. Correct.
Certainly with my home finances, this would not be like a great way to be doing things. So,
I guess I would just say, so the green bar represents 150 days cash. So like if for some reason you didn't collect any revenues, you would have 150, days to operate, which is what Raftelis says is sufficient, which is what, when you look at other municipalities, what their target is, it's very similar. I would also remind everyone for the general fund, what we're targeting for the general fund is 120 days. It's actually 30 days less. But the reason why this is 150 is this is a smaller fund compared to general fund. That's why there's an extra 30 days as a benchmark. And
The other thing that you're not seeing behind the scenes here is transfers from the general fund to the water fund, right? And so what this does is, I think after 2024, and I'm
that's
trying to
right.
think-
So that was the other
Yeah.
piece. So by this projection assumes that the water fund is completely self-funded as of fiscal year 2025. The last transfer occurs in fiscal year 2024. So, and that was part of the whole plan, was to make the water fund and the sewer fund self-funded by 2025. So
Right,
that's
and
another.
part of the promise of this financially, and I get there's inflation and things are going up more than we had hoped that they would and all that. I get that. But the plan was that as this became independent, then presumably it would offset the need for some of the general tax revenues. And that there could
Right,
conceivably
exactly.
be a decrease in
Yes.
the overall tax rate.
That's correct. And some residents have contacted me directly. And I'll tell you, each and every resident who has contacted me, I was able to confirm that their taxes have more than offset their increase in water rates. So yes.
Now, I get a little confused sometimes about some of our reserve funds, and I know we've been drawing on some things for the fire department and so on. The number that we have here in blue, the cash on hand, does that include all the reserves that we have that are dedicated to the water fund?
These are the reserves for the water fund alone in the water fund account, in
So-
its own little fund. This is nothing to do, this is completely separate from the
Right,
general
but-
fund, completely separate from everything.
What that would mean is in 2028, if there was some unforeseen disaster where, you know, the water plant blew up, we would have $1.5 million and the rest we would need to start over.
Correct. And I guess,
As opposed to $3.5 million or whatever we have now.
correct. And I guess I also would want to remind everyone, we are fully insured. We reviewed we were always fully insured, but I did take a close look at the insurance. And we can share maybe at a future meeting. And I know I've shared it at the commission meetings, but you know what the deductibles are and all that. The water plant is fully insured. And I think I'd have to bring forward what those deductibles are.
Right. And you know, the other thing too is that our expenditures on page 38 include what we call renewal and replacement. Right. And so every year, right, we have 5%, and this is standard as well. Every year we have 5% on top of our capital plan. We have 5% segregated for what we call renewal and replacement. So I agree with you that in a perfect world, everything should be maintained as motors, as pumps reach their useful life, right? We have the funds in that year to meet that demand. And so at the end of the day, we've tried to encapsulate everything into this plan.
Right, but my point was that's good. I mean, we're creating reserves, et cetera, but that number, that 5% that we're quote rainy day, or we use it as is, as needed, is still reflected in that 1.6 million or whatever we have in cash, which is our 6 months worth, basically, at the end of 2028.
Well, I
I mean, it's all there. We don't have separate piles of money lying around.
right. No. This is as the vice mayor indicated, this right here is just the water fund and industry wide. This is what typically we see in an industry wide. We see annual expenditures to maintain the asset's useful life. We repair things. We have a 5-year capital plan. And at the end of the day, the goal is to have, 150 days cash on hand to meet anything outside the norm. So.
Question, based on the 10% rate change, and I'm skipping ahead here, would that would appear to leave about 3 million in reserves? Would that as well give us 150 days of cash reserves?
So board member Goldberg is on page 31. And
Yes.
so your question is on about fiscal year 2028. Where does that blue line end up? Okay,
Yeah,
so yeah, so
Back up
that,
to
so
around 3 million.
yeah, so it is, it bounces back up to, over 3 million or so, and it gives about 250 days cash. So remember, and that is like kind of far out. So what we are here to discuss today is what will impact fiscal year 2024. And I just wanted to have an eye for the subsequent years, 2025, 2026, 27, and 28. We are not here to, to finalize what the October 27 rate will be. We're kind of here to narrow down what we think our selection will be for the rate increase for 2024. So we still have, a year from now, I'm going to be up here to talk to you about 10/1/24, and then a year from then. So each year we're going to revisit those annual increases. So I'm glad we're looking at, so far ahead, but just keep in mind, we will revisit each annual rate increase with each year. So
Okay,
that
let
we
me,
keep that in mind.
Jump in here for a minute. Obviously, the graph's going down and some people will look at that negatively, like,
Right.
oh geez, we're not gonna have enough. I mean, the fact is the benchmark, the green line says we have enough. And in
Right.
fact, just on the projections in 2028, it's maybe starting to go up, but regardless of that, as long as we're meeting the green line,
Right.
and the question is our goal to establish big reserves, or is it to pay as you go, which I think, in my mind, that's what it should be. And it can be, as you're saying, Natasha, every year you're revisiting it anyway. And so you can make adjustments. I mean, obviously the 8%, and of course, if you increase it to 10% or 12%, you're going to have more. I mean, it seems, without just my first blush, would be, okay, 8% seems to do the trick. Why would you necessarily go to 10 or 12, especially if all the costs and expenditures and everything is already baked into these numbers? So it's not like, we have to plan for a new something or another that's going to cost millions of dollars 2 years from now. That's not the case, at least as what's known. So anyway, go ahead.
Who raised their hand? Sorry, is someone? Oh, nobody. Oh, okay. So if we look at the bottom chart, that is a comparison of the revenue. The revenue is in the green line, and the operating expenditures in the red line. So that is just the operating expenses and revenues. The chart above it is basically everything. So we kind of wanted to compare, we wanted to pull out the operating component of it so you could kind of see how those things compare. And you can see that the expense and the revenue, the red and the green lines, they meet in 2025 because that's the point where it becomes self-funded.
Can you comment on why operating expenses are expected to take a transient downturn? That's sort of atypical in an inflationary era.
I think it's a timing of the capital
The bottom
expenditures.
chart on page 29.
Oh, no, I guess not. Yeah, that's operating.
It
Yeah,
says
that's true.
operating.
Right, right.
I mean, it's somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, probably not a big deal. It's
Well,
somewhat,
so, well, to be honest with you.
it's more undulating than really dropping dramatically. but
Well,
there is a
right. I
drop.
mean, I think that we anticipate, I think overall, when you look at 5-year forecasts of expenditures, right? We think at some point it kind of levels out a little bit and gradually picks up. And so I think what you're seeing there is you're seeing that operating expenditures are anticipating now again, this is operating expenditures. Operating expenditures tend to go down here because that's when we start to pay off more of the
Is that what it is?
of the debt.
Okay.
So what's happening here is that
Okay.
we pay off, I think at the end of this year, our debt service drops by $375,000. And then the following year, it drops off again by $375,000. And so when you take those big debt service costs out, which are included in operating, what I tried to show here
No,
was.
that's perfect.
Yeah.
That makes
Is it
complete sense.
just, David,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
the debt
Yeah,
balance, so
that's
you can
the-
kind of see.
That's the debt service right there.
I'm curious, obviously, they're not anticipating a lot of capital improvements in the next several years, or if they are, they're gonna
yeah.
fund it some way other than loans.
These are all the, so that is page.
Oh.
Capital plan, it's 42, page 42. That is, so the way this is done is we know what the costs are now, 2022. We don't and what we're doing is we're using what we think the expected inflation will be in the future years. So we're not gonna, the 2022 baseline, the reason we do that is we're not gonna do all these projects. They don't need to all be done in 2022. They need to be done in the future, but what's being done is it's a 10% for inflation, then the next year, another 10%. And then I guess we're hoping inflation will come down eventually. And then it's 777. So it's healthy. I guess the point is there are some healthy projections for inflation. I don't think we underestimated inflation, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so you can kind of see the timing of all these various projects into what fiscal year we're expecting them to happen. And so I guess what has happened in the most recent past is they just didn't happen in the fiscal year that they originally planned for. I mean, these are kind of conservative, when we're planning these out. So if they get shifted to the next year, we kind of see that in the budget.
Absolutely. And so what we do is what staff does is we sit down with the water plant operator, sewer plant operator, right? It's, I like to think about it like this is your car, right? All right. So, but you got to keep this car for a long period of time. So at what point do I change the transmission? At what point do I do, the major things? And then what we did is we said, okay, we have a baseline cost here, what we think it is today. If I don't get to it in 2024, right, that SCADA system that you can see there, I think the fourth one down, the SCADA system that today costs $25,000 in 2025 is going to cost me $30,250. So, there is a cost for delayed maintenance. And so what we've tried to do is we tried to say, hey, listen, give me all of the major components and let's kind of spread out what we think that cost is going to be. In addition, what we've added is the second to the bottom line there is meter replacements. It's important because what is a meter? A meter is the cash register of the water system. And so meters don't improve with time. They actually get less accurate and it produces water loss. And so what we've done is we've said, what if we did, $50,000 worth of meter replacements per year? And what will that look like? Now, some of the big major condo associations, those meters are huge, right? And so, but it's important that we get into consistency of replacing those. So as part of what staff did, we also built the 5-year capital plan to include in those numbers that you're seeing in those charts and those graphs.
You can't charge for meter replacements?
No, so that's funny, right? Because up to the meter, right, from the lateral, from the road up to the meter, including the meter, is our property. After the meter, right, is the homeowner or the condo association's responsibility. So, right.
Then I thought we would just talk about the sewer fund really quick. So that's on page 30. And so this chart that we're looking at is the 8% increase for the next 5 years. And this is a much smaller fund. City of Delray actually processes our sewer, but we have some expenses with respect to like lift stations and things like that. And this is what the 8% rate change looks like. And so kind of similar to the water fund, if we decide to do 8% increases for the next 5 years, it's fiscal year 2028, where the days cash gets close to the minimum targeted of 150 days. On the chart to the right or below, you can see how the revenues and the expenditures, once we now going into fiscal year 2023, they really do track each other very closely. And the operating, the lower chart, the operating expenditures compared to the operating revenues, the expenditures are tracking the revenues. So we're in pretty good shape there. So that's kind of why I was thinking we should focus on the water. So yeah, you know, some thoughts could be if you're thinking that you'd rather do a bigger rate increase now, and then that could potentially just mean a smaller increase in the future. Or we could take, you know, a slightly, you know, an 8% increase now, and potentially that might mean a bigger increase in the future. I mean, we don't have to, I guess my point is we don't have to keep it consistent with each subsequent year. You could do, you know, a 12% now and then a smaller increase later. There, you know, it's the scenarios are endless.
So what I see in, you know, business is that the increases are, you know, much higher now during the height of inflation, and we're expecting lower increases going forward in the coming years.
For inflation.
For inflation. So I think the 8% across for 5 years is reasonable. And, you know, take it year to year. I think you just run the risk, right? Things get more stable in the economy in 3 years. The question could come up, why are we continuing to raise at the same rate? So, you know, for discussionary purposes, you know, we may want to consider recommending going with the higher rate now and giving them the opportunity later on to lower it.
You could, but, well, I guess we'll just keep going here, but I don't like holding people's cash for no reason. And this can be adjusted on the fly. I mean, we can do it quarter over quarter if we feel like it. So, I mean, I just don't see any reason that, you know, it works. Obviously, I've looked forward, and, you know, obviously 5% doesn't seem to work, but 8% does. And so, and the projections show 8% seems to continue to work, but it doesn't even make any difference because 8% works for now, and you revisit it. And I'm just not in favor of holding people's cash for no reason.
Yeah, and for me, in spite of my devil's advocate type questioning earlier on, I would agree with that. I mean, clearly the 5% I think is
Right.
too low.
Right.
And it puts us at some risk that's unnecessary, although yes, in 1 year, it's not gonna
Right.
do anything terrible, but bouncing rates around, I don't think is good psychologically either for people.
Right.
So it would appear to me that at least for now, 8% would be fine, with the idea that it's adjustable and it'll be revisited and go from there.
Yes, absolutely. So as the year goes on, we check to see how revenues are tracking with what we were expecting it to be. And just to complete the conversation, here on page, what page is this? Page 33 is the 5% rate increase projections, and which was part of the study. And yeah, you can just see just in a couple of years, you dip below what the minimum recommended days on cash is. So yeah, I think that clearly would be way too low. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, having a compromise of the two, and then, you know, we will give updates on how the revenues are coming in.
And the goal that staff have is always to have a 5-year, right? So we'll continue to update this, you know, so staff's charge is to continually update this 5-year forecast. And right now it's showing, you know, 8% seems to be the right number. And as we update it with new data, then then our assumptions will change, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I think it's a great tool to use for future planning, as well as it gives us a longer outlook of where things are headed. So
One peripheral question, is there a time limit on when we have to spend the money from the federal government?
yeah, I think and I'll get you, I'll confirm it, but I think it's it's either a 5 or a 10-year window from the last time.
So it's a pretty long window. It's
Yeah.
not like we need to do these capital improvements if we're
Right.
using their money
Right.
soon.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to, let me just ask about the rates. You know, on page 30. Sorry, thank you. Page 35. So obviously some folks, I mean, commercial is way up, obviously. Of course, they're not, we only have one commercial account, right? I mean, that's the only, they've dramatic, you know, increases, but I guess
Jacqueline, could you put up page 35?
35. I'm just looking.
Yeah, I like this chart. I included it because I wanted you to see how, if you were wondering how did revenues come in compared to what we expected. In David's budget presentation, he showed that the revenues were pretty much on target with what we were expecting, but this chart really breaks it down. So if you could move here, I'll do it. I can do it myself, actually. Did I go too far?
I was just
Uh-oh.
curious. Well, they can afford it over there.
All right, this one. Okay, so this breaks it down by customer. So previously, if you recall, there was a separate rating structure for multifamily, which included condos and a couple of single-family home communities. Those were combined into multifamily that had its own rate structure. And then single-family homes had a different rate structure, and commercial might have had a different rate structure too. I can't remember. So with the new rate structure, we actually have only now one rate structure with the tiers. And the intent was trying to, we didn't want to have this confusion, like who was in what rate structure, because I don't think people were expecting those single family homes to get into the condo rate structure. So by doing the tiers, we were able to accommodate some of the ways condo uses water and the ways that single family uses water, with the intent of trying to make it more equitable among the different classes. So this chart tells you a couple of things. The first thing it tells you is how did the overall rate increases, how did the actual come in? And so in fiscal year 2021, we ended up getting like a 19%, and this is both combined, water and sewer. We ended up getting revenue increase compared to 2020, 19% higher. And then for 2022, the revenue increase was overall 13% higher. So those were pretty much on target, or, on track with what we wanted the rate increase to be, what the actual rates actually increased. So that was good. But I guess one surprise was that if you look at column E at the top for fiscal year 2022, one thing that was a bit, so going into this, I kind of thought the single family homes would see the biggest reduction in usage because the single family homeowner, we're thinking, would have the most control over their, their water usage, and that since condos, it's pretty much the association pays the bill. So we weren't sure, we were thinking that we didn't think that condos would have such a big rate, such a change in their usage. And so it was a bit surprising. Column E at the condo line, on the top on the right there was actually 11% drop in usage for condos. So that was a little bit surprising. And single family homes actually had an increase in usage of 25%. So completely opposite of what we thought. But what happened is, so column D compares like kind of, what each class paid per gallon of water, because we wanted to balance equity. So remember how the rating structure works. You have a flat amount that everybody pays, and then there's amount based on usage. So what happened was when the condos had such a reduction in their usage, they still had to pay like that fixed amount. So the amount they paid per gallon, per 1,000 gallon of water was this, 15.2 number compared to single families, which paid only 8.2. But that's because the fixed portion, that flat rate, became a bigger component of the revenues that they paid. Because they had such a big reduction in fees. So let's say somebody went to zero, they're gone, they shut everything off. We still have to cover the fixed costs. So that's kind of why that happened. But overall, when you look at their whole water sewer bill, they had an 11% drop in usage, and they had only a 6% increase in their bills. Single family homes, they had a 25% increase in usage, and they had a 30% increase in their bills. So it's not exact, because remember, we have to cover our fixed expenses. But if you do reduce your usage, you will have a lower bill. So that's kind of the point, and that's kind of what happened here. So condos, they saw a 6% increase in their water bills, and it's because they reduced their water usage. Single family homes saw a 30% increase in their bills, but that's because they had a 25% increase in their usage. Commercial saw an 87% increase in their bills, but they had a very dramatic increase in their usage. And I think that's because, like, if you look at the year previously, they actually had a drop in their water bills, but I think that's because people couldn't come.
Yeah, it was COVID. I'm sure they had nobody
COVID.
there.
So that's telling, right? Like how many, travelers they had and usage they had. I think that makes sense with all the travel restrictions that we had the previous years.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, you're welcome.
So
Thank you.
let me ask the question. As I recall, going back a couple of years when you started with all this, one of the complaints was that the people in condos felt that they were paying a disproportionate share in some of these changes. While some of us may have disagreed with that, that's what instituted this. So my question is, I guess, since we're going with this current rate structure, have those kinds of complaints dissipated? Or are you hearing things from single family owners that it's unfair, or from condo owners that it's still unfair? Or when are you going to get around to doing it? Or has this alleviated the perceived problem that, people thought that somehow or other the rate structure was being unduly unkind to them?
So I can start, maybe you can finish. So I heard mostly from single family homes because they saw increases in their, because they actually see, they can see the bills as opposed to the condo owners. And so I heard the most from single family homes that, why are their water bills going up so much? And it wasn't until we kind of talked through what was actually going on and the offsets on the tax bill, then I think those complaints dissipated. And then also, I don't think people are paying attention as much as they should to their usage, because there were a couple of single family homes that when I showed them the usage, which is shown on our bills, the usage, how it changed over time, then that also helped explain. But I have not heard from condos. Have you heard anything from condos?
No, I haven't, staff, we do hear from mainly condos, but it has to do with when there are water leaks, irrigation leaks, things like that, right? They notice it. But the other thing too is you got to keep in mind is that when we send the bill to the condo association, it's out of I don't know what their procedures are. I don't know if they mark it up or if included in their budget is a 10% or whatever. But I will tell you that, what staff and what the town is billing is based on actual usage. And so we help them. Staff has helped other major condos identify leaks, because we have a pretty robust system where we can drill in by the hour and see usage
When the
go
lines,
crazy.
right.
And so it helps us. Matter of fact, our system keeps a rolling 96 days. And so when people get their bill and they go, oh my gosh, my bill is, high, we can zoom in and we can see when that peak was, and we can see what time that was. And 9 out of 10 times it is irrigation related. There's a break in the line or whatever. But to answer your question, haven't heard of any complaints of disproportionate. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some association, they just say, oh, we have to increase monthly dues because of water bills. But it hasn't, but it's, everything's been.
Well,
going up.
everybody's water bills are going up. I mean, we're
Everybody-
about to raise it
Right, again,
potentially
Right.
another 8% or whatever.
Right.
So
right.
Why do you see your insurance bill?
I know, exactly. It's everything. It's been everything. So I guess maybe that's why, because insurance is going up, electric is going up, everything is going up. So I think this is, and at least in my world, this is pretty much in line with the other insurance.
yeah, I
and,
mean, again, there's no perfect way to figure out how to do
Right.
this. We had big
Right.
discussions the last time about what's really a fixed cost versus a variable cost. And
Right.
I mean, eventually you come up with something. I was just curious whether the feeling was that in general, no one's happy with paying more money, but that people were satisfied with the way the system was structured, basically. And I gather that there's been no outcry about anything.
I haven't heard anything about the equity
Yeah.
between the groups. I mean, now we have one rate structure.
So,
So, I mean, no one can say, oh, these single family homes are in the condo, it's just one rate structure. So at least we have that, which is, I think, simplifies things a lot. It's a big improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
David,
No, go ahead. Sure.
the fire rescue update.
Yeah, staff is working closely with the town manager's office. I know that the town manager's office is working with the architecture and the contractor. I do not have an update just yet that I can share, but I know that we are anticipating an increase. We're just trying to figure out what that's going to be. So probably by the next meeting, matter of fact, before our next meeting, we'll have those numbers obviously for our board to present to them, as well as with a contract, I would assume with the contractor. But I apologize, I do not have any update for that number as of today.
Okay. Any board member reports?
No, just one comment on that. I mean, the purpose of asking for that information was to see whether this board might be in any future assistance, I think, in trying to figure out ways where, if it were to be required, hopefully it won't be, but that there were going to be expenditures that exceeded the initial 10 million that was appropriated, where that money was going to come from. Given the limitations that we have on spending under the charter and so on and so forth. And, that was the only reason. It was just pointed out at the last commission meeting. Planning time and actually getting referendum questions on the ballot is a long process. That was the only reason. It was just pointed out at the last committee. I think that probably means I've spoken long enough.
Just a comment, there's no impact to the schedule by us not proceeding on the budget now, is that correct? For the implementation date, none of that's at risk. Okay, all right, thank you.
Did my sound come on at all?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, I was being too quiet. One thing I've asked for in the past was, is there some kind of spreadsheet by basic category on the fire project? Even today, yes, it's going to change. It's still working with the engineers, but there should be some financial report, like maybe 6 months old at this time, of what we anticipate paying by different vendor, different parts of the project. David, do you have that?
No, I don't have that for today's meeting. I know that the town manager is obviously working with the architect, right? A lot of the cost is driven by the architect and then the contractor, right? They got to get together. But I know that we will be presenting something relatively short. I just don't have it for this meeting today, and I apologize. But I definitely agree with you. And as soon as I get that, it'll be made public, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
The final site and everything is locked in though, correct?
Again, I deal with the numbers as far as the site though. Yeah, from my last, I think from the last public meeting that we had here, the final site is still geared up to be in front of our existing building here. That has not changed to my knowledge, right?
Okay.
Since I was muted earlier, can I just interject one thing? Go back to your first quarter budget. I realize the way the books and records for I'll define it as a nonprofit organization. Okay. Are you satisfied with when you look at the first quarter results and saying your percentage variances are jumping around? Are you concerned at all? You do say many times it's variable in the sense that it's only the first quarter. But is anything there that stands out to you that you're highlighting or flagging to look closely at before the end of the second quarter? Like looking at the expenses, minus 12, minus 13, minus 20, and after one quarter to be that far off budget, sometimes somebody close to them will say, yeah, I know it's supposed to be the accrual method, but we missed this, or this is the bookkeeping is a little bit different on a day-to-day basis. Anything from your vantage point that is something you're watching closely now?
No, I mean, I would tell you obviously on line 30. So right now I'm on page 24, line 30, that's, for example, that's legal. you know.
Okay, that's the
Yeah.
good news.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, that's that's definitely the good news. But you know, as far as each of these positions, you know, you got to understand most of the cost here is you know, we capture in the salaries and related type of category. Most of these departments here might have a little bit of capital. But the main ones you want to really keep an eye on are, you know, the fire rescue. Fire rescue right now, we're down a little bit by 5%, but nothing that, you know, the challenge when you're talking about governmental is when you break it down into a quarter. We should look at financial statements on a quarterly basis, because sometimes when you look at them more frequently as a monthly basis, there's too much white noise in there. So when you grab everything on a quarterly basis, I think a lot of these things will get closer. But right now, I think that's normal to be about 10% under budget right now. There's nothing that comes to mind in those departments that would cause me any
Okay.
concern.
Well, that's for you too on a day-to-day basis. I find it interesting, the investment earnings last year was almost nothing, and this year already, the first quarter, he did more than he did for the whole year.
Yeah.
Why did it change?
Well, last year, you know, there was a transition in my position. The first thing that we did is we let the investment professionals with PNC Bank. I wanted to give them a test drive first. You know, I wanted to, they came to us and they said, you know, we can invest these monies. Now, you have to understand, we've got to be ultra conservative with our investments with public monies. We're restricted, obviously, on what we can and cannot invest in. And so what I told the manager, I said, I recommend, let's go ahead and let's see how they do. Let's not necessarily do this in-house. Let's see how PNC does. And so far, so good. Now you got to understand that, you know, interest rates have done better, and that's
Yeah.
obviously helped our position out. But yes, it has done exceedingly well.
Yeah, last year was 6,000. I mean, I said in reverse, last year was 6,000 in the first quarter. This year, it's not the dollars. That's an easy, obviously, number to see and know it's a real number. It's cash in the bank. I'm just curious why we're doing so much better. But it was a general question, is that you look at these numbers and if you're satisfied that, and you know in your mind the way the mechanics of your bookkeeping is, these things will fluctuate more in the first quarter, level out in the second, and be more accurate and possibly, I don't like to use that term, by the third quarter. So it's more of asking you the question if anything is happening, and when you look at these and it doesn't make sense, and when you look into it, there's something that doesn't make sense, you'll bring it to our attention and to everybody's attention, obviously. So
Absolutely.
okay. So I don't know when I came back online, but I think I listened closely.
Okay. So announcements, January 31st, 1:30, the Town Commission special meeting, February 1st, Natural Resources Preservation Advisory Board regular meeting, February 7th at 1:30, the Town Commission meeting, February 9th, 9:30 a.m., Planning Board regular meeting, February 14th at 1 p.m., the Code Enforcement Board regular meeting. February 20th is the Town Hall is going to be closed in observance of President's Day. And February 21st at 1:30 will be another Town Commission meeting. When are we meeting again? Do we have a schedule or not? I don't think we do. Or do we?
Do you know when our next meeting is by chance? Hold on.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you.